Okay, Robert Spangler,
Here.
Neil Butnick,
Here.
Judy Neville, Tom Schulte, is he on?
Here. He's coming.
Okay. Amy Carroll,
Here.
George Flavel, is he
Here.
on?
He's-
Todd Lavieri, Chris
Here.
LeBrun, Michael Chan,
Here.
Maria Weingarten.
Here.
Oh, good, everybody. Robert Hamill
Here.
and our first selectman, Kevin Monahan, all present.
Okay, thank you. Let's see. I need a motion to approve the minutes from our last
So-
meeting, October 13th.
I'll move.
I'll second it.
Tom
That's
and
it.
Bob. Okay, thank you. All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Opposed, none? Okay. All right, we have the first selectman provide an update. It feels like we've got a lot going on in town. I know you're juggling a lot. Over to you, Kevin.
Okay, first item is COVID, obviously. As you heard from the outcalls both Friday night and then last night, we've had an uptick in New Canaan as is occurring around the neighborhood and around the state. And as we reported, the schools did testing last Friday, and to our surprise, out of 540 students and teachers at Saxon High School, there were 0 positive cases, but that doesn't give us a lot of comfort because the virus is on the rise. We are doing community testing this Friday of up to 500 people. We have to charge $90 a person for that. And that is meeting some resistance, although we have almost 400 signups already. Because, you know, there's free testing available. The state is not making free testing available to towns. It's available only in cities in Norwalk and Stamford and other cities around the state. And so they wanted us to sign a contract for multiple weeks, and we didn't do that. We wanted to see how Friday went first. But the community testing will give us a good picture of really how much positivity we have in town, and also to be able to identify asymptomatic people. We have cases arising in some of the school, town staff and some of the Board of Ed staff, and it's obviously moving toward a phase 2, but we need to actively work on trying to identify the cases and isolate people that are positive. So secondly, on the so obviously the objective is to keep schools open, and the governor, as you know, had ramped us down to 2.1. We are actively working on trying to keep the outdoor dining going beyond Thursday, which was the originally scheduled termination date. And we are looking at some town hall restrictions in terms of how we operate, but no immediate plans to close town hall. But then on the capital projects that I have been reporting on for a few months, everything's on schedule. The wastewater treatment plant is actively being worked on. The Sax CHP project is moving forward. Solar at East School has been completed but not yet activated. The solar PPAs for Sax and Wester are in motion, and then we're going to turn to some of the town buildings with PPAs not investing our own capital. So that's all as we reported. I'm actively working on a cell tower location. That would be a public safety tower with the town taking the tower with Homeland Towers to the Connecticut Siting Council for approval. That's on the northwest corner of town. And then, as you know, we just last week stood up a police department building committee, including 2 members of the Board of Finance. And we're going to proceed to study that renovation of South Avenue or possibly a new building, but we have to look at that. And then finally, we really haven't done much internally on the budget process. Linda will explain. We're starting Friday, and well, I'll wait to perhaps comment during your discussion of guidance on that front. That's all I have.
Okay, quick question for you. Has there been any discussion? I think you had mentioned this maybe in passing about an opportunity to offer maybe a small copay or some kind of copay for the for testing if for those people who were in need. Not for tonight, but if it's something that we ought to think about, depending on which way this turns, I think, that would be something we could either have a special meeting on if you needed it, or we could do it in December. Leave it up to you guys a little bit.
The $90 is actually a bargain price. The problem is the insurance companies are beginning to refuse to pay for asymptomatic testing.
Right, okay.
And Brian spent about $50,000 for his testing last Friday. It's not inexpensive, but it's important that we do it. I didn't want to sign a contract for $300,000 or $400,000 without talking to you.
Yeah, appreciate that.
And,
Okay.
but it's really, the whole COVID thing is moving very fast. I mean, at some point we may just take a different approach, but for now we want to do more testing.
Yeah, okay.
And ideally, I should say also, we've complained to the state, the governor's office, and we've asked, why can't we get some support when other people in the state are getting support for testing? So I have people working on that.
Well, it's an incredible Board of Finance outcome, or excuse me, Board of Ed, what am I saying? Board of Ed school outcome, 500 tests and no cases. That was unbelievable. So, okay. Anything else, Kevin?
That's all.
Got a lot. Okay. So I do have a citation I'd like to read. A citation of service from the General Assembly of the State of Connecticut, introduced by Representative Tom O'Day, Representative Lucy Dathan, Senator Will Haskell, Senator Alex Bergstein, for Robert Bob Spangler. In recognition, Bob, of your retirement from the New Canaan Board of Finance, where you've served with distinction and provided unparalleled guidance for over 16 years. Your financial leadership and outstanding contributions to our community are greatly appreciated and will long be remembered. Best wishes for continued success and happiness in your future endeavors, and a long and happy retirement from the Board of Finance. Now, it says something here about serving ad hoc committees and not really going away, but that could all be a typo. Look,
That was a very small font, I hope.
yeah, it was a very small font. I'm trying to read it closely. Look, 16 years, Bob, my God, 16 budgets, thousands of pages of material and countless debt offerings. I did ask if the Assembly could designate the 6:59 minute as the Bob Spangler minute, since that was the time that Bob regularly walked in to the Board of Finance, having run from the train, I might add, to the meeting every single month. Their answer was no. But look, Bob, thank you. Thank you. The Board of Finance, the town, are grateful, obviously, for all that you did. We owe you a huge thank you, and frankly, we owe you a huge round of applause.
Yay.
That's
So,
very nice.
Bob, I don't know if any other members have anything they'd like to say. You do get the last word, but
Well, no, I have to.
The citation will be arriving next week, and we'll have it delivered directly to you.
Oh, that's terrific. Thank you. I was trying to, I was like, I wonder who that's about. Honestly, I didn't think it was about me. Thank you.
I don't know if any of our members had anything else they wanted to add. George?
Well, since the time I joined the board, I always said that Bob Spangler was the smartest guy on the board, and he's never done anything that would disprove that observation. So, it was
Well, you may
it was
be
a
right.
pleasure,
It's only
Bob.
the smart ones seem to leave, so I don't know.
Well, yeah, I don't know about that. I probably have the most direct experience. I'll grant you that. I do thank you for that. That's very nice. And to me, it's just 16 years seemed like the right amount of time. I don't know that I'm focused on tenure or necessarily the number of years, but I will say just the last couple budgets, I felt like I was losing my edge a little bit, and wasn't quite as focused as I can be. And I think people know this, but my job's elevated a little bit, and just the responsibilities I have are greater, and I just felt like I didn't have as much free time as I used to have. So I thank you for that. Plus, this is a really, as you all know, this is the best board in town for sure, and really it may be the best iteration of the Board of Finance. Judy was first select woman when I joined, so she's got more tenure and more boards that she's been a part of. But I bet she would say the same thing, which is this Board of Finance is an incredibly well just smart, focused, forward-looking, much better forward-looking. I mean, just the fact that you're about to talk about, guidance. We never had anything quite that, 16 years ago for sure. It was just never that well run. So it's been a pleasure. I do think I will watch you guys a little bit on TV, I suspect, and I'll have some withdrawals, but I'll have to wean myself of that. And if I call Neil and tell him what the cost of some tractor trailer, some
Yep.
machinery was 8 years ago, it just humor me, but I can't help it.
We're
So
gonna-
good luck.
You knew every single fact. I love how you would say, wait, last year that there wasn't a tire in the rear of that tractor. Really, this guy knows.
And I hate to tell you, but it's just in there. I didn't actually look at it, but anyway, but thank you.
Well,
And
thank
that's
you.
very nice thought that's very nice of you, Todd. to
Can
have done
I-
that. Thank you.
Happy to do it. Go ahead, Judy, I think you're on mute.
Well, I wasn't. Okay. I remember when I first met Bob, he was barely 40. And I said, oh, it'd be so nice to have someone besides bond counsel advising us when we're issuing debt. And he looked at me and he said, oh, but that's exactly why I'm here. And I said, but you realize everybody else in the Board of Finance is at least 20 years your senior plus. And he said, oh, that's fine. I said, they're a great group. You'll love them. I'm so thrilled. He was always been such a great addition.
So I will say the Board of Finance was probably, Judy, when 16 years ago, the Board of Finance was 20 years, 15 to 20 years at, average age older than it is right now. It was a lot of senior folks on that Board of Finance when I got there. So
It's probably close, but it's always been the best group. We always agree. I could finish your sentences vice versa at some points. Yeah.
Well,
Todd, I'd
thank
like-
you so much.
Todd?
Thanks for that too, Judy. Yep, go ahead, Kevin.
Yeah, let me, on behalf of the town, and I know Kathleen's joining us tonight, so we'd like to, on behalf of the town, thank you for your service of 16 years, but also thank you for the service you did on the athletic turf fields, and which was yeoman's work to get those fields done, and I know how hard you
We're
worked.
here.
And so thank you on behalf of the entire town.
yeah, that was an experience, but we're glad we got that to where it is. And I learned a lot, so that was good. Thank you.
And good luck in your new job, because you got a hot shot spot. You played it down. But it's a big job. And we wish
Well,
you luck.
Yeah, there's a lot. Yeah, I've got 164 emails sitting here I got to look at after I'm done with this. So, all right, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Well, the next item on the agenda is actually the approval of the meeting schedule for the board meetings. And so all I would ask Tucker is that you copy Bob on the meeting schedule and have him as you can dial in optionally. So
I can do that.
as a subject matter expert. Okay, so we do need an approval of that. I think you've gone through it. Any questions on the meeting schedule? Anybody?
Nope.
If not, we can have a motion to approve the schedule.
I move.
Neil,
I second.
second?
I second.
Is that Amy? Amy, second? Okay, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? None. Okay, good. Thank you. Thank you for that.
Here's
Okay.
hoping some of them will be in person. It would be nice to
Oh,
see.
don't even say it. Now, one thing on the meeting schedule, I've got the list of the committees here. And so we will obviously look for volunteers as we go forward, as we go into next year and then look at the schedule. So I'll be looking for emails from you. I'll send a note out to everybody. We don't have to do it on this call, but just give me your thoughts if you'd like to stay on, if you'd like to do something different. Bob is obviously listed on infrastructure, public works, so there's some things we have to fill in. So I will send a note out, get your feedback, and we'll have all that buttoned up in the December meeting. Okay, Linda. A financial
Okay, I
update.
have, sure. I have two items for the financial update. One, I just wanted to give you an update on where we are with COVID reimbursements and what we've submitted between the state and the federal government. So between the town and the Board of Ed, a total submission we're at 471,000, and this is for COVID expenses through June 30th. Of that, 201,000 is through FEMA, and 269 of that is through the state CARES Act program. And included in the CARES funds is the 75%, 25% that FEMA does not reimburse. We're rolling that into CARES. So we have a total of 471 submitted. We're waiting to hear back, and we're now working on third calendar quarter of this year to submit and see where we are so far.
Hey, Linda, could I ask you what, I'm just not super familiar about what qualifies under FEMA and what qualifies under CARES. I'm just kind of curious of, these are just extraordinary expenses associated with dealing with the pandemic related things, whether materials, testing, or what?
Right. It's a combination of testing, personnel costs and whatnot. The way that FEMA, basically they created two programs. There's a traditional FEMA disaster refunds, and then there's some money that the federal government had designated to states to administer to help local governments. That's the predominant amount of the CARES funds.
Okay.
With FEMA funds, they were only reimbursing towns 75% of those expenses. So what the CARES Act allowed us to do was the portion that wasn't reimbursed by FEMA could roll into CARES. And then within the state programs, there are also some department specific. We've received there's some reimbursement directly for health, for education related programs that the Board of Ed has already submitted, and they received a little over 90,000 for that. We've received about 30,000 from the state related to health departments. There were some monies for elections and just gearing up for elections in terms of prevention of spread of the disease. But that's predominantly what the two pots of money are. They're basically, it's just the way that the federal government decided to split the allocation of the funds. But for the most part, what's eligible in FEMA is eligible in CARES. The state instructions to us was submit to FEMA first before you submit to CARES, and then what you don't get from FEMA, turn into CARES. So that's kind of how we went about that.
Okay. Thank you.
So,
Linda, so on these expenses that are submitted to these two bodies, what is are there any expenses that we have incurred that are COVID related that were ineligible for submission to either program?
We're going through that. We're going through that now. For example, and a lot of it is also negotiating back and forth and advocating for things to be in. So as an example, they said, for example, things like face masks for town employees were not eligible. But then we went back and said, well, we're a town and we also have first responders, we're town employees. We should be eligible to submit reimbursement for firefighters and police officers that are going into these facilities. So those types of things are we had to negotiate in. But they also looked at overtime and personnel expenses. There were some expenses that they deemed appropriate, some that they said were not. Technology, for example, when we were working remotely, there were some individuals that, for example, that didn't have maybe a cell phone, that needed to have a cell phone or access to laptops and stuff like that. So depending on the role of the individual, some of those expenses, they'd say, yes, this is eligible. But for some roles, they said, no, this is not directly COVID related, and therefore not. So it was a constant back and forth in terms of what's in, what's out.
And we continue to segregate into separate accounts COVID related expenses so that we track them. And so this money will come against that general budget line.
Right. So what we'll do with these funds when they come back, because most of these expenses were incurred in FY20, where we used our existing funds. So this revenue, if we get the full 471, that'll all go into the general fund and basically add to the available fund balance.
Okay. And do these numbers include any submissions by the Board of Education?
sure. Right here.
Yes, I split it out between the town and the board. But it doesn't include the bulk, the 400,000 and the 1.5 million that you just did, because most of those expenses were this fiscal year. So these were just expenses through June 30th. So we will see more expenses submitted moving forward, beginning July 1. On the town side, since June, on the town side, we've already spent almost 300,000, and you'll see that in the financials that you have in front of you. in COVID-related expenses. And the board, obviously, you heard from them last month. They spent in excess of $1.5 million just this fiscal year alone in COVID expenses.
So Linda, do we have any guesstimate as to what kind of a COVID run rate we could be looking at for next year's budget?
No, that's one of the things that we'll be working on as we
Okay.
go through the budgets and talk to Tiger and his crew, but no, not off the top of my head.
It'll be interesting to see how much money the state has available to do the reimbursements. That's, the CARES Act was not exactly equitably distributed among the states. If you were in Vermont, you got about $2,000 a person. And in Connecticut, I think the number we got was somewhere $300 or $400 a person. So see how far their money goes.
Any questions on or anything else you want to walk through, Linda? Do you want to go through any of the revenues and the expenses? It looks like, at least revenue wise, we're on or slightly ahead of track.
Right. On the revenues, we're pretty much on track. The only thing that's somewhat lagging, and some of it is just timing, investment income. We are losing some on rental, the few rental properties that we have because we've provided that grace. And then obviously recreation programs, those are seasonal. And so we get a big chunk of that revenue in May, June, July, and therefore we didn't get any of that. So there's some lag in recreation programs, but they're offset in the other revenue items. Prior year taxes and tax collections, as I've shared, has stayed on track, and expenses are where we'd anticipate them to be. With the exception, obviously, you see that 1.5 million special appropriation that we did for the Board of Ed is what stands out on the expense side. But other than that, everything else is tracking normal.
Okay, anything else you want to cover? Any questions for Linda, team?
That's all I have for the financials.
Okay, then we'll move on to item 6, the budget guidance. So just maybe as a summary of where we stand over the past couple of years as a recap. The fiscal year we just closed, as you all know, back in June, showed back-to-back years of below budget spending. This year, we also required less income from our taxpayers for the second year in a row. We think that's a first. Through our planning, we've been able to keep taxes from rising, and while not cutting any of the existing school programs, sports, arts, teachers, police, fire, as we know, so many districts across the state have had to do. No other town in Fairfield County was able to ask their taxpayers to pay less in total taxation in back-to-back years while delivering below budget spending 2 years in a row. And I'm thinking about Bob's comment that he didn't think he was on his game with the budgeting, and we just delivered ridiculously great results. So, so Bob, I don't know, maybe there's, just step back a little bit, and you helped us get through some pretty tough budget. Our single largest expense, I think, as everybody knows, is for education. It's about 62% of the budget. About 70% of the budget, again, will be spent on education, police, and fire. We continue to have declining debt. We currently have the lowest debt amount the town's seen in over 15 years, as the advertiser reported last month. Our current debt of about $100 million represents about 4% of our town's income and about 1.3% of our assets. So the debt level overall is not a problem. Obviously, we're watching our annual debt expense and trying to keep that at a manageable level. We'll talk about that in our guidance. We are also, as the first selectman noted, we're evaluating our long-term capital plan. Obviously, we want to continue to enhance the assets in our town. We agreed that we would take a pause on this, if you recall, back in the spring, with discussions with the town council and the selectman's office on long-term capital spending this year until we had a better view of the impact of the pandemic. And but when that gets turned around, we know that our schools, our police station, the library will be among the top areas that we will spend money and invest in. So from a Board of Finance perspective, as before, our top priorities continue to be, number one, our schools must continue the long tradition, multi-decade tradition now, of being a leading district. Two, we must continue to have a beautiful downtown and surrounding parks, activities, programs, all the things that people expect in this town, and we've got to have a finance plan that achieves those goals. 3, continue to provide the safety and all the emergency services for our residents and our visitors. And then 4, of course, continue to maintain the financial strength that we want and have as a town. And I would say, in short, provide excellent value while holding us or helping us succeed financially, both in good times and in bad, as we just experienced. Going forward into this new fiscal year cycle, working with selectmen, the town council, Board of Ed, all the other departments, we'll continue to look for ways to spend less and to help offset or minimize any necessary or contractual increases. Our bond rating continues to be AAA per our guidelines and our expectations. Obviously, this budget will propose and work on this year. We would expect to continue that. Our town pensions are fully funded, also per our guidelines. We expect that to continue. Our rainy day unassigned fund balance. Right now, our benchmark is to be in between 15 and 18% of our annual budget, and to hold that in an unassigned general fund for risk management. As we know, and as we've talked about before, bond agencies want to see at least 10% of the town's annual budget in an unassigned fund so that we can take advantage of great rates. We're currently slightly above the upper level of our benchmark due to running surpluses these past 2 years, even after returning about $4.5 million in our budget this year to taxpayers from this fund to pay for expenses rather than use taxpayer funds. So our guidance for this year overall will be consistent with the operating principles I just walked through and mentioned. Again, namely really careful spending, continued investments in our town, maintaining financial disciplines, and having modest, if any, tax increases. So I'm going to turn it over to George and Chris and Michael, who've been working with Linda and myself to put together a budget, put together some preliminary planning. We are not done yet, as George will explain. We've had to work with the schedules of the departments who are under tremendous stress right now dealing with COVID-related issues. So we're probably a few weeks behind where we'd like to be, but I would put it in the category of just not a big deal. We will get there, we'll get the guidance, and we'll have a good budget. We also need to respect the pressures that the town, particularly the Board of Ed, is under and the success they've had in keeping the schools open. And we'll work on some of those variables and those items over the next few weeks. So George, Chris, Mike, over to you.
Well, I just pretty much agree with everything Todd said. But I think, just a heads up, I think the board had and the Board of Ed and the town have done really noteworthy work over the last couple of years, as Todd pointed out. I think going into putting together next year's budget, it's going to be tough. It's going to be, I think, harder than it's been in the last 2 years for a couple of reasons. One, we're getting slightly better at this now. We've kind of taken some of the low-hanging fruit. We know we've got some interesting COVID uncertainties that we really don't know how to price or how to cost out. We just had a pension advisory subcommittee meeting that Neil will tell people about, but we're looking at possibly an increase in the amount of how much we have to allocate for our ADEC for our pension plan. Not sure about what that means for OPEB, but probably guessing that there's going to be some increase there. School and town continue to have labor contracts that have built-in increments that probably are larger than the increment we're going to see in the grand list. Now they're not proportional, obviously, but there are two diverging revenue and expense lines that we're going to have to figure out. And we know that the Board of Ed is going to have a tough time, not only because of COVID, but because of last year's approach to the way they handled their medical costs. And that last year was worth, I think, about $2 million, and they won't have that available this year. So it's going to be tough for them as well for us. So we're going to keep our shoulder to the wheel, and we're going to keep working at it. And we'll come back to you in December, hopefully with something that will be crisp enough for everybody to take a look at in terms of not only operating costs, but also our capital needs, as well as taxpayer funded capital.
Hey, George? Whoops, I'm mute.
Nope, we can hear you.
Yeah. So do we know when and I know it's later than right now, when we get the revised grand list estimate? Because certainly one of the bright spots, obviously everyone knows with COVID is the, the conveyance and the revival of the property tax. What's the timing there? Because I know that's a big factor in trying to figure out the revenue side of things.
I don't, London, do we usually get that in January?
Yeah.
Well, we should be getting the preliminary because it's the October grand list. So we should get some preliminary numbers here in a couple of weeks.
So that's
Then,
good.
you know, you have the appeal process and whatnot if that happens.
Yeah.
But I should be getting numbers from SEBI in a couple of weeks here, and I'll share those with you, perhaps before the December meeting.
Yeah, so that'll be helpful, you know.
Amy, the purchases don't help. It's just new construction that helps.
New construction.
Mhm, mhm.
I mean, you know, we're still operating off the October 18
Yeah.
reval. So
Right.
real estate market's hot, but we're not getting the benefit
Yeah.
from transfers.
So we,
Other
but we
than-
do get,
other than conveyance fees.
right, but we get, yeah, I was gonna say, we get conveyance fees
Yeah.
and new construction.
New
And-
construction, and we have new construction coming online.
I know that on your tablets, George had put the guidelines in the plan for the year with some design principles, a first crack at the operating budget for the town. I do want to just highlight that the Board of Ed asked to meet the 18th of this month. And what we're going to do is really have a working session with the Board of Finance and the Board of Ed and try to change the process a little bit and work together to create the guidance in the plan rather than throw a number over the wall, have them scramble for 2 months, come back, and we spend a month of February trying to sort it all out. There's got to be a better way. So we're going to work together and start the process a little sooner, but hopefully take hours off the back end of it in the spring and winter. So, more on that, but that meeting is that we're doing. Chris, anything else you want to add, or Michael?
No, I think Todd, you and George said everything correctly. We want to keep the high level quality of life and ensure that we have a fully funded pension, as well as we also want to make sure that we have enough in our general fund, but be able to deliver the high quality services that, you know, that Kevin and his team, as well as Brian Lutzke and his team need to do to keep our town being top in the state for all the services. At the same time, obviously, we have to try to also keep our mill rate down to very modest growth, you know, as well. So I think we're trying to balance those two things. And I think having that meeting with Kevin and Linda has helped. And now having a meeting working together, the Board of Ed on the 18th will be another positive step to improving the whole process as well. So I think it's a great move, Todd.
Linda, anything you want to add? I know we went into this hoping to push it off just a little bit because we wanted to see how the year was going to unfold. But so far, I think it's unfolded as expected. We're getting more revenues with building permits and conveyance fees, but much less with parking, netting out more or less. And the real question will be some of our base case costs as it relates to COVID and maybe Board of Ed.
Right. I think anticipate as we did in prior years, you recall that for this year's budget, we had a fund balance drawdown of $4.5 million, which based on our year-to-year expenses, we don't spend that much. I don't anticipate that we will draw down our fund balance this year by $4.5 million. And so I think as we're projecting our beginning balance for this budget, we should also factor that into account. Now, the flip side, you know, we did transfer over for the Board of Ed COVID expenses $1.5 million, which is an extraordinary expense that we didn't have initially. And so, but I do think that is something to also look into. We just got back our preliminary audit numbers for the years, and therefore the numbers that you have that I've shared with you in the financials are pretty close to where we are. So we did add about $1 million to the general fund this year because of those savings due to COVID on the Board of Ed and on the town side. But I do anticipate that this coming year we will draw down $4.5 million, and so I think that's also something to factor in as we're looking at budget decisions for fiscal year 22.
Okay. Mr. Spangler, any comments, cautions, insights, recommendations?
I was looking at this. So obviously you have to assume that they're, unless we know by the time you put this together that we're going to be out of a COVID environment, you're going to have to assume the worst and plan that way, which is going to be hard. And the hard thing, and this runs counter to what I would have normally done, but you're going to have to keep some dry powder in the general fund and maybe use that to like, almost, I was thinking like, how can you create like a springing effect? So if we get through this, things could rapidly improve. I happened to be on a conference call with our chief economist yesterday, and he's very bullish on how quickly we'll come out of this. So he's a deep V recovery guy, and he's showing, he thinks Q4 GDP growth this quarter, just the quarterly number, is 10%.
Wow.
So you can't, I don't know how you plan for that, but somehow I was thinking about how can you design something such that Tiger can get what he wants if things improve, but he gets nothing at the moment.
Yeah.
Sorry, Tiger. So I can say that because I'm leaving.
Well, he's used to the latter. He's definitely used to the latter.
But like how do you like have a springing effect such that if we have if this thing turns, it could turn very nicely for us, right? Parking and some of the revenues that we've not been able to receive. How do you make sure that gets to where it's needed most, but you hold it in reserve? You hold those expenditures in reserve, just because you can't control that event. So I was jotting notes to myself. I was like, how would you structure that? Because you can't change the mill rate, so you can only do it through the general fund balance.
Right.
Exactly.
And I think all you do is not apply, not pay down the mill rate up front, but hold it in reserve to actually use it for future expenditures as opposed to paying down the mill rate.
Yeah, an alternative too is you can use, if you find we do have a greater cash cushion, we can always approve something for bonding and choose to pay for cash. And it doesn't give you quite the immediate hit, but it does reduce over time the pressure on the budget for debt service expense.
Or the other thing we could use, if in fact it is a DP recovery, is we could look at some of that money to fund to replace taxpayer funded capital projects, which would have an immediate effect on the operating budget.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, so you could use the general fund balance as efficiently as possible. Turning it to the taxpayers is not necessarily the most efficient. It looks good, but it's not efficient.
Yeah, it's not if you think there's a quick recovery, right? Well, or if there's any level of uncertainty, maybe that's a better way to say it.
Anything, it's certainly a long-term benefit to everybody if we can pay for more capital. Especially the things that other towns pay for with cash. Maybe we ratchet up the dollar amount of something we would bond for, or if we've approved something, we find we don't need it, then we don't have to bond it, we can just pay for it. So, and then the next year there's less pressure.
And then the only other thing we do as a firm, we already do as a town, is we always talk to our clients in the state of Connecticut. It's the client, you just talk about what are the assets that you own, what's your core competency, what's not your core competency, what might you have an outside party manage, own, so that you're running what you're good at, and you have somebody else run something that you're less good at, and maybe there's ways to create some efficiencies there and find some relief. That may not be a inter-year discussion. That may be a intra-year discussion, but that's, this town does that already. But I'm looking at the person, because Amy, your picture's in front of me, who thinks a lot about that, and it's a good thought process.
Well, I think the model Linda and Michael, Chris and George have allows us to play with every one of those variables we just discussed as we get through the actual planning and the decision making later in the process. So, okay, good input. Any other comments from the board? Bob or Tom?
I'd like to ask Bob about interest rates. And the
I'd actually there. So this was a very interesting, this was a client call with our chief economist, and he did talk about where rates are, and he does see, like, he is not supportive of another stimulus package, because he thinks this economy is going to turn around quickly. He worries about some upward inflationary pressures above 2.5% and the back half of next year. So calendar year 2021, where he thinks there'll be sustained greater than 2.5% inflation coming. And the hard part is that it's very hard to turn that off once it starts. That was his comment on yesterday. Having said that, he says that he doesn't see the Fed changing interest rates for probably 16 to 18 months. So actual short-term rates won't change, but there might be some inflationary pressures in the back. So second half of 2021, if they don't get if there's too much stimulus going into the first part of this year around COVID. Now,
I'll say
I don't know. I don't personally agree with that, but I'm just telling you, that's what our chief economist said.
the folks over at JP Morgan are not looking for a change in the Fed rates till into 22 at this point.
Yeah.
So,
That's what he said as well, but
Yeah.
he just wanted to put people on notice that he could see some upward pressures on long-term rates if there's too much stimulus going into the new administration.
I mean, short rates won't be moved, but the curve could certainly steepen, and we could have much more significant long rates, which is what really impacts our borrowing. So
Right, exactly. Yeah. Now, muni rates are incredibly. This will be the largest ever issuance year in the municipal market.
Really?
It could hit 470 billion,
Oh, right.
and we're usually scraping to get 400. So it was a big year.
but even if rates back up, I mean, they are so crazy. Well, maybe it's not crazy low. Maybe that's like the new world order. I don't think anyone's talking about, enormous backup in rates in the near term. I mean, it's like, when you had the 10-year, 60 basis points for a while, and, so even if it's go up to, 100, it's still relatively cheap money,
Yeah.
I mean, it's all
this
relative.
town's borrowing costs are going to be very, very competitive for
Exactly.
years to come.
It's not going to make us a huge decision. It's not going to impact us like when you were, 4 or 5% interest rates.
No, but if you're looking at 2.5% inflation in the back half of next year, then you're looking at negative interest rates, negative effective real interest rates anyway.
well, they are now. So
Yeah.
if the Fed keeps printing to buy bonds, they'll keep them low.
The problem is, I think they're starting to run out of stuff to buy.
We're going to be issuing plenty. We'll be buying that.
Okay, Chris and George, anything else you want to cover, Michael, on the guidance? So the December meeting, we'll have had the meeting with the Board of Ed. We'll have a better view, and we'll have a little bit more granularity around this. Got the number here, 0 to 2%, and we'll finalize everything else over the next few weeks. Okay, if there are no other points of discussion, we can move on, Linda, to the last two items.
Sure. One is the approval of line item transfers, and these are just moving funds between accounts just to balance things out. They're just there for your review. And then on the approval of transfers, we do have two items for your approval. One is a transfer from contingency for our emergency management staff. And therefore, that is that 35,000 transfer. And then there is a 4,000 transfer related to an adjustment for capital expenses that were incurred, and we moved those from an operating account to a tax-supported account, and so that's what those transfers are for. But they are coming out of contingency, and those require your approval.
Questions on those approvals?
Linda, what was the 35,000 one for again? I'm sorry. The
Part-time emergency management,
Okay.
Russ.
Thank you.
For two part-timers.
Okay, any other questions? Motion to approve the transfer?
So moved.
Judy, second. I heard Bob. Bob, you got a second, your last.
I was gonna try to close the meeting, but
Oh, okay, well, that's still on the table. Okay. All in favor of the transfer, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed, none? Okay. Let's see. Linda, I'm sorry, just from the last meeting, any expectation in terms of the money spent or needed for Claudia for counting ballots?
I haven't got an update from her, but I'll circle back with her, and I'll shoot those out. I'll email those out because I can get those fairly quickly.
Okay.
I would say they did such a phenomenal job.
yeah, I was just gonna say that.
I mean, wow. It was, I could not believe how how smoothly, how well organized. I
Perfect.
just didn't get a sticker. That was the only bummer.
Exactly. Either.
Me either.
But well done. It was beautiful. They did.
Yeah, it was very well organized.
Yep, excellent. Good. Okay. Anything else? A motion to adjourn.
All right, so moved.
Thank you, Bob. I'll second. All right, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All right, well, I will miss you all, but, you know, I suspect hopefully I'll get to see you.
I bet you will.
If nothing
Sure.
else, I'll dial in every once in a while.
And Bob, I always get to see your name coming across. So that's good. You
We'll
know,
hold you to it. A happy Thanksgiving to all of you if we don't see each other.
Yeah.
Okay?
All
Thank
right,
you all.
take care. Bye-bye.
Good night.
Bye-bye.